is an amazing platform that you have arranged for us, and specifically during this period of lockdown when we are all feeling so separated and isolated. So I really heartfelt gratitude to all of you that put your time and effort into creating this forum. It's really a time I feel I can interact with many of you on a global level, and so that's very wonderful. Thank you. So as we've mentioned, today's topic is about hormones. And it will be nice that when I do seminars, I like to interact, and it can be a bit difficult online to do that. But what I'd like to start with, for those of you who are on Facebook or on Zoom, and if you've got access to the chat tab, what I would like you to do is, when I say the word hormone, what comes to mind? What do you think of when you hear hormones? So if you could just type it in to the chat tab, I can read what you're writing, and that will help me to understand what everyone's thought processes are when it comes to hormones. So whilst you're doing that, I'll just tell you a little bit about what I'm planning to cover today. What is very prevalent in today's society is that somehow we have gone from taking some element of personal control over our health into now passing that over to other people. So when something goes wrong, we want a solution, we want a fix. And we think of going to a doctor, going to a health professional, and just saying, what's wrong with me and how do I fix it? And what I really understand with both Ayurvedic medicine and with functional medicine is that we have to really strip back the layers and go back to the basis. And that requires all of us individually taking responsibility for our health. Now, it's actually really wonderful for me that my co-host today is a medical doctor, because then it gives us the opportunity to understand a lot of what I'm saying from what would be viewed in a Western medical practice, as well as from the kind of practice that I have and the people that I would see. And what is really often the case is that people will have an imbalance, or they're feeling unwell, and they want that quick fix solution. So when you're thinking, and I'm reading the chat tab here, so people are talking about something that's unable to control. They feel like these, it's sort of the general consensus I'm getting is that people feel hormones are something that create imbalance. Hormones are something that they don't feel they can necessarily control. And if I was to be even more specific, what hormones do you think of? When I say hormone, what hormones do you know? So we're understanding there's some level of fluctuation, there's an effect that it has on the body, and many of you are saying that you feel that it's uncontrollable, you don't know how to manage it. So going back to what I was saying, that when we think about hormones and the interaction of different hormones, what's happened is we've started to hear names of certain hormones in the media or through the doctors when we go and visit them, and we sometimes start to think that this one element has all of a sudden got out of balance, and I just need something quickly to bring it back into balance. And that's really what I want to go against today. I really want to give all of you some of these tools to be able to say, okay, I'm not feeling amazing, I don't think I'm quite myself, but why and what's going on? So the very first point is that both functional medicine and Ayurveda talk about balance and awareness. So when we talk about balance, it's never one hormone. So it's never one element that is overriding another. And this is very common if we talk just immediately about something like menopause. In menopause, the real problem that women are having is that the balance between the hormones has been lost. It's not that either the progesterone has gone AWOL or the estrogen has gone AWOL or all these technical terms have gone AWOL. It's literally the balance has been lost between these different hormones. And this is actually what happens even earlier on in a woman's life, whether we're talking about menstrual cycles and when women have this discomfort on a monthly basis. It's not that one hormone is out of sync, it's actually because this balance has been lost. And when we're trying to address this balance, the way we want to address it is not by honing in on one particular element, but it's always to step back and look at what are you doing on a daily basis. So today, a lot of what I want to talk about is going to be things you may have heard before. It may be things that you commonly get told to do, but you somehow just are unable to put it into practice. And often you just want to go to your doctor and get that prescription. But I really want to highlight and emphasize that it's all those things that you do on a daily basis that help us be more manageable and in control of our bodily hormones. And this is the same when we reach older age and we enter times like menopause. A lot of the imbalances that are done at that point is really difficult to undo then. You know, getting ready for menopause, interestingly, even Western science is now understanding, starts like when you're 30 or 40. You don't get ready for menopause because now you think your periods are going to stop. You actually prepare for it well in advance. And that's how the body naturally functions. So we spoke last time, for some of you that were able to tune in or watch the recording, and we won't repeat those, but in Ayurveda we talk about the different doshas, and we talk about how these doshas have to be in a state of balance that's right for us. So when we are all born with an inherent level of this vata, pitta, kapha, which then comes together and makes our body constitution. Now, when these elements go out of balance, we start to notice signs and symptoms. And often these start very mild. They could start with digestive complaints. They could start with mood complaints. They could start with appetite related. It could be anything, little bits of aches and pains. But often what we do as a general society is we brush it off and we just ignore it. We take a painkiller, we take a Band-Aid, and we move on with our day. And the day that we have is a very structured, every day is the same, whether it's winter, whether it's summer, whether it's time of the month, whether it's not time of the month, everything is the same. But if we look around and we actually look outside the window and we look at nature, nothing is ever the same. You know, like if we just even look at a tree or a plant, it goes through those different phases. It ends and then it starts again. The phases begin, they change, they start again. And what we have very commonly become as a society is a little bit stagnant, that we need to wake up at the same time, we need to sleep at the same time, we eat the same food. It suits me, so I'm going to do this repetitive cycle on a daily basis. And that's something we need to stop doing. We need to move back and we need to start becoming more aware of ourselves in relationship to the environment around us, and then how can we manage those imbalances that we're having in our body. So in the Ayurvedic explanation of life, these three doshas, which you'll hear about a lot, vata, pitta and kapha, govern us at different points in our life. So when you're young and you're a child, you're dominant in the kapha dosha. So we spoke about this last time, how this is a very stable dosha, it's a very nourishing dosha, it allows us to grow, it allows us to develop. So children, as we're growing, we need that stability from kapha. And this is something that lasts really up until the age of 30. Following on from this period of kapha, we enter into a time of pitta, which is from 30 to 60. And then from 60 to older age, it's really a time of vata. So what that tells us is that depending on where you are in your life, you should really be making changes to the way that you eat, making changes to the activities that you do, and making changes to the different ways that you even process your thoughts and information. When you're younger, you know, you might hear things and it might affect you differently to when you become a little bit older. And we need to learn all these tools and how to process our inner emotions. And so when it comes to hormones, it's very similar. Hormones is all about understanding the different effects that it has on our body. So I want to really emphasize today that firstly, no hormone should be isolated and understood in separation. And secondly, that it's really the things that you do on a daily basis that make a difference to your overall health. So let's talk about the monthly cycle. Let's start with the hormone effects that us women have on a general basis. So actually, some of us view menstruation as being a negative thing. You know, why do I have to have a monthly cycle? Why do I have to go through this pain? You know, men don't understand the discomfort that we feel on a monthly basis and how difficult it actually is. And if you go back into the Vedic scriptures and the understanding, there's actually a lot of information about how your lifestyle should change during periods of menstrual cycle. And one of them we commonly follow, which is the practice of deity worship, which stops certain activities that we're told not to do. And people have taken that to feel that, you know, as if our body is not pure, it's not clean, and therefore we're not allowed to do certain things. But in reality, that's actually not what it's about. In the course of a month, we're going through those different doshic cycles. And depending on which dosha is predominant during that monthly cycle, we actually need to change the way that we act and the way that we behave. So during the time that we're actually bleeding and we're actually having our cycle, this is actually the time that vata dosha, which is the air element, is in predominance. And actually, I would like to change people's viewpoints on menstruation and make them understand it's actually a blessing that we have this monthly cycle. Because what we do in this monthly cycle is we actually detoxify our body. We actually cleanse. All of the different things that have gone on in the month have an opportunity to just come out and cleanse and start again. And what the other thing the menstrual cycle really helps us to do is it helps us to monitor our health. So when I have clients in a clinic, we often use the cycle to monitor the progress that you're having. So if things you've done in the course of the month have been supportive, people notice that the cycle that month was less painful, less irritating, there had less mood swings, there may be less water retention. So many things are different. And some of you may have noticed during lockdown, you know, maybe your cycles came earlier, maybe they haven't come at all. And you're kind of wondering, well, I'm doing everything the same, so why has this happened? But actually what happens is, again, the doshas are interlinked. So mental health or stress will have a direct impact on our reproductive hormones in the same way that what we eat, if it's very sugary or very high in what we call the glycemic index or carbohydrates or kapha, that will have an impact. So really having this monthly menstrual cycle can be very, very helpful and very supportive, because it helps us to understand, what have I done this month? How well did it function within my body? And actually it's okay to slow down. You know, to have the same routine every single day of a month is actually not the way we were designed. And therefore to take 4 or 5 days where in our schedule, we maybe don't put as many activities in, where we maybe don't go for a run and push ourselves exercise wise, but maybe we take 5 or 6 days of just being recuperative, being more introspective, having that time to really detoxify even our thought process, even our physical body. So actually it's a blessing sometimes when you're told in the traditional Vedic culture, you wouldn't even cook, you wouldn't even step into the kitchen. So all those household duties were taken away from you. And actually that's quite a beautiful thing, because that gives you 4 or 5 days to pretty much be on your own, to really reset the body, to reset the mind. And you get to do this every single month. And so if we think of menstrual cycles and the woman's body, we're actually very blessed that we have this opportunity to analyze how we're doing on a monthly basis. And in the same way, as we enter into more fertility age, we need different things. So as we're looking, this is so common even today, you know, people have tried to have a busy and successful life. They have a good job, they may be traveling around the world, and now they want to get pregnant. But it's not happening. Fertility and infertility has risen dramatically. And that's primarily because it's not a button you can just switch on and off. You can't say, well, I don't want a baby and now I want a baby. You need to think, have I made my lifestyle conducive that my body is ready to conceive a child? So if I am constantly under stress because I have work meetings or work deadlines, if I am traveling across the world, if I am drinking lots of coffee and high sugary foods, if I am not sleeping, if my body is in a constant state of stress, then the very last thing our very clever body is going to do is allow us to get pregnant. And so we have to again step back and say, what have I been doing on a regular basis? What messages am I giving my body that are therefore conducive for me to now conceive a child? And the very same concept goes ahead when we look at menopause. Women hit menopause, they get the hot flashes, they feel irritable, but all of this is a reflection of their physical body and how it was nurtured the 20 previous years. You know, as our bodies stop producing the hormones in the ovaries, it moves to something known as the adrenal glands. And the adrenal glands are responsible for releasing our stress hormones. So what's very common is women who are more pitta dominant, or women that have really exerted themselves for the last 20 years, maybe been under extreme amounts of stress and pressure, they actually tend to struggle more during those menopause years, because now their adrenal glands are struggling to produce the sex hormones in the same way that they would have produced the stress hormones, because they're overworked. And so everything comes together in understanding that balance that we have to create. And the balance has to be created every day with changes depending on our external environment. So I just want to talk through some of the different things that we do on a daily basis and some of the different hormones and how they're interlinked. So one of the first things I want to talk about is the food that we eat. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the food that is grown and a lot of the food that comes to our plate is not the way that food used to be before. And as a society, we are actually living in a very toxic world. And this can be evident from the fact that you now get young girls at the age of 8 that start menstruating. You get hormone imbalances at a much younger age. So we have to question, why is that happening? We're not doing anything dramatically differently. Why is everything speeding up? Now, a few more years of menstrual cycle can actually have a massive impact on a woman's body. Because if you think about the ages that woman is supposed to menstruate and all those changes are meant to take place, we've now elongated it from 8 to sometimes even longer at the other end. And that can actually be very depleting for a woman's body. So one of the reasons why girls are having these cycles a lot earlier is actually because of the number of toxins in our environment. And some of these toxins, what they actually do is they go into our body and they behave like hormones. And we know these to be endocrine disruptors. That's what they're doing. And so when we have these hormones, these toxins going into our body doesn't understand the difference between this toxin and the endogenous hormones that we produce. And as a result, many of us have started to notice a lot more hormonal imbalances. And this can even come from food. There's often an argument about organic and inorganic food. And people say that, you know, the science doesn't show that organic food has more vitamins and nutrients, and I don't think it's worth spending extra money on organic food. But for me, when I talk to people about organic food, I'm not even talking about the nutrient benefits. It's purely decrease your toxic load. You know, if you can get organic food, especially if you're struggling with immune-related problems, if you're struggling with hormone-related problems, you want to decrease that toxic load. And one of the best ways to do it is by making sure everything that's on your plate is free as much as it possibly can be from toxins. Now, I know I'm probably speaking to an audience that have that knowledge because of the way that we prepare food, we offer our food, we make sure that everything is prepared from scratch. And these are the things I'm talking about that on a daily basis have a massive impact. If you're having foods that are from pre-prepared, they're processed, they have chemicals, they're not organic, fast foods, high in sugar, all of these things are actually adding to the toxic load. So the first thing that's really important to remember is what is going on your plate, and how close to nature is it, what you are eating. So as we take on foods that are more in their whole natural form, our body actually can understand what's coming into it. And I spoke about this last time, that sometimes foods that people eat now, our body can't actually differentiate between a toxic danger and it being food, because a lot of it is not even food. You just have to read the ingredients list. Take a packet of crisps or take some yogurts even and read the ingredients in there. And sometimes you'll struggle, like I've seen a bag of potato crisps and you read it and you struggle to find the potato in it because of the number of other things that are in it. And it makes you wonder, do people actually read what's on the back of this? You know, this shouldn't be going in the body. A potato crisp is literally potato and a bit of oil. If there's anything else, then there's a problem. And I'm not telling you to eat potato crisps, by the way. I'm just giving the example that, you know, we have to be very conscious about what is going into our body. So when we have toxins go into our body, the other thing people need to, we need to understand is that as we increase the toxic load on our body, we increase the nutrient demand on our body, because our body needs to process these toxins. And in order to process these toxins, we actually need a whole range of vitamins and minerals and nutrients to be able to get these toxins out of our body. So firstly, we've put in food that is quite toxic in nature. Secondly, it's low in nutrient density. So now what we've done is we've increased the toxic load and we've made it difficult for our body to get rid of these toxins. And this, in my opinion, is one of the key reasons women have so many hormonal imbalances. It really goes back to looking at that diet and looking at how much toxin is going into our system. On a monthly basis and on a daily basis, when we produce hormones, we also have to get rid of these hormones. And I'll talk about that in a little while, about how we get rid of the hormones and why it's really important that we have really good detoxification pathways. So to start with diet, so what is on your plate? Is what's on your food recognizable as food? Is it a nice balanced plate of food with what I would like to say half a plate of vegetables? So when I say half a plate of vegetables, this is a variety of colors. And the reason we look at colors is because the skin has lots of what we call phytochemicals on the skin. And these phytochemicals are really important for supporting our immune system and for getting rid of this toxic load in our system. So the best way to do it is without even worrying about the names of different chemicals and looking at all the different, trying to psychoanalyze what the different elements are that you're having, just half a plate of a nice variety of vegetables, variety on a daily basis. So what we're putting in our body is really important. If we're having a very high sugar diet, now I'm going to take just this point and explain how just having a high sugar diet can have such a big impact on our overall hormonal balance. So I know as devotees, we love our prasad and we love to give Krishna the best offerings, and that can include lots of sweets and lots of fried foods. And whilst this is perfectly fine for Krishna to eat, it can sometimes be a bit of a heavy digestive load for us to eat. And I have to admit, over the years, I used to, if I ever did some kind of a consultation with somebody, they would run a mile from me in the temple so that I didn't sit next to them in the prasadam hall, because they were trying to cover their plate and like sort of say, I do listen to what you're saying, but just today. So you don't need to run away from me because we're virtual, but it's all about understanding what am I going to do that is right for me. And I also want to say that sometimes this can mean being different. It can mean saying no. If you're going to, we're not having this issue at the moment, but if you're going to a program and prasad is served at 10 o'clock at night, it is okay to say, thank you so much, but I can't eat right now. I'm happy to take the plate, maybe have it another time. You don't have to do what everybody else is doing. And it takes courage, but it also, in the end, is about you understanding why you're eating and when you're eating and what you're eating. So let's take high sugar foods. When we eat food that is high in sugar, what happens is that our body needs to release hormones. Now, the reason I asked about hormones is because a lot of us think hormones literally means estrogen or progesterone. Some of you have said insulin, but actually there's about 50 or more different hormones in our body. So this is thyroid, all the different hormones. We have insulin, we have ghrelin, we have lots of digestive related hormones. Then we have the hormones that we consider with our cycle, so progesterone, estrogen, testosterone, all of those. But actually they're all very closely interlinked. So when we eat high sugary foods, our body releases hormones like insulin to help put that sugar into the cell so that we can use it. Now, if we keep having high sugary foods and the body keeps pumping out this insulin, it gets to a point where the cell actually says, I'm not going to listen to you now anymore, insulin, because I don't think it's healthy for me to keep getting this sugar surge. And we end up with something known as resistance, insulin resistance to that particular hormone. So our body is still pumping out the insulin, we're still eating the high sugar foods, but the cell is not taking in the sugar in order to help with the energy. And what happens then is the body, again, being very intelligent, doesn't want all this extra sugar floating around in the blood. And so it quickly gets rid of it and it packages it as lovely fat in our body. Now, this fat that we are now storing, interestingly, also produces hormones. And so as we're eating high sugar foods, our cells are not being nourished anymore. So this is a very common dynamic. Women say, I eat well, but I'm still tired. I don't have any energy. And sometimes it's because it's not now no longer about what are you eating, it's about how well you're processing and digesting that food. So as the insulin levels are rising and the cells are not taking interest in this sugar, we now have a knock-on effect on our stress hormones. And this can cause our stress hormones to rise because the body now considers this a stress load. And as our stress hormones rise, we could do a whole seminar on just the effects of having high levels of stress and how that can have an impact on the entire body. And as we start to store this fat, the fat actually releases hormones, and one of them is known as estrogen. And a very common problem in women, whether they're suffering from things like endometriosis or whether they're suffering from fibroids, it all comes back down to this excessive estrogen production. And they may go to the doctor and they may say, okay, what can I take because I've got fibroid or because I've got endometriosis? And you maybe get suggested to have an operation to remove it. But until you don't go all that way back and remove that sugary food and start to stop that sugar load going into the body, you are not going to undo that downstream process of those fibroids and of the endometriosis. And so something so simple as sugar and having lots of sugar in your diet can actually end up creating such an imbalance in your hormones further downstream. And so it's really important to remember that it's not about what you're seeing and the symptoms that you're seeing. You want to go back and you want to address the root cause of the problem. So we want to make sure that our food is not high in sugar. We want to make sure it's as close to nature as possible. So that's the kind of food that we are eating. Now, once we eat the food, digestion is important. So we want to make sure digestion is optimal. How do we ensure digestion is optimal? It's about how much you eat. You eat according to your digestive capacity. And how you know that is once you've eaten, you should feel energized and not sleepy. And you should feel full for around 3 to 4 hours maximum. So if you're getting hungry straight away after eating, if you're falling asleep after eating, you need to go back and recheck what was on your plate and how you ate. So it's really important to be very in tune with yourself. This is something I can't tell someone, a doctor can't tell someone. This is something you know because you're in your physical body and you're experiencing it. Is what I ate properly digested? Do I feel energetic? Do I feel I can last the 3-4 hours, probably 5 hours before my next meal? So eating the right quantity, making sure you don't have too many liquids with your food. Now, it can be a common culture that people don't drink throughout the day, but then when they sit at their table, they glug loads of water down. What that does is it dilutes our digestive juices, so the acid in our stomach and the different digestive enzymes that we're going to release, they become diluted. And this causes imbalance in the digestion of the food. So first, we've worked really hard to get really good food into our body. Now we want to make sure we can digest it and absorb the nutrients from it. And so you want to make sure you're not having too much liquids with your meal, and that you're sitting and you're chewing your food properly and you're really helping that absorption process to take place. The other thing we want to start looking at is our bowel movements. And the reason we want to look at our bowel movements is because, as I mentioned earlier, we are releasing the metabolized hormones in our stool and in our urine, in our body. We get rid of excess hormones. So if you're constipated and if you're not going to the toilet every day, or even if you have diarrhea, you want to start thinking about how that can actually affect your hormone balance. Because if you're not releasing the hormones out of your gut, what happens is we actually have a way of metabolizing hormones in our body. And the way we metabolize hormones is it's through the liver and through the gut. If for some reason the metabolism doesn't take place properly, our body reabsorbs the hormones that we produced. And when it reabsorbs the hormones that we produced, these hormones are actually a lot more toxic and a lot more stronger than the hormones that were originally created. And so just by being constipated, you could be creating that vicious cycle of high levels of hormones in your body. So you really want to look at your bowel movements. Are you regular and are they well formed? The other problem with having loose stools is that you're probably not absorbing nutrients optimally. So as I mentioned, we need nutrients to even produce the hormones, to metabolize the hormones, to get rid and detoxify the hormones. If everything we eat is just coming straight out, then we're not absorbing those nutrients. So we need to make sure we work on making, having optimal stool formation and actually eliminating properly. And that's the same when we have constipation. If you don't go for a couple of days, then there's those toxins that are sitting in your bowels for a long period of time. You feel uncomfortable, there's fermentation, and all of that also creates, like I said, reabsorption of those hormones. So we want to avoid that. So these are really simple things that, you know, we don't have to go to a doctor to find out about. You know, what is the quality of the food that I'm putting on my plate? What is the way that my bowels are functioning properly? And the other important thing that I mentioned, which is about toxins. And toxins are not only those that come in through our plate, it's actually through our skin as well. And with women, I think this is a really important area for us to be aware of. In a culture where some you'll find that some people use very minimal products on their skin, but then you'll find there are some people that actually use a huge number of different products, from face wash to then cleansing serum, and then, you know, something to hydrate their face, and then they have their foundation or their concealer or whatever it is they're using. And what people forget is that what goes on our skin is very similar to what we are eating in our body. And so Ayurveda actually talks about, do not eat something, do not put something on your skin that you would not eat. So if you're not willing to eat it, don't put it on your skin. Now, I find that products that go on your skin are one of the worst at disrupting your hormones. So this is makeup, this is shampoos, this is body washes, this is body creams, all of them. If you just turn over and look at those ingredients and think, would I put this in my body? And then think again about whether it's something that you want to do. Dyeing hair is the same. We think of our hair follicles very close to our brain, to our head, and the chemicals and the dyes that we use on our hair, which then penetrates into our body. And these toxins again start to overload our liver. As they overload our liver, it's less effective to help with the metabolism of the hormones. So really, really be conscious. I know many people are very using clean products already, but also be conscious of products that are labeled clean. Just because they're labeled toxic free or chemical free, actually I look even more closely at those products, because often it's just a marketing way of saying that I don't have toxins in them, but they've got it in somewhere else. It's a bit like when you find sugar free. They say sugar free, but actually they've got something which has the same effect as sugar, but it's just not called sugar. So you want to be very conscious what's in the packet. So looking at your toxins, and these toxins could also be from chemicals in the water that we drink. It could be in the way that you're storing your food. I've seen sometimes people use cling film or aluminium foil, or they're reheating in plastic containers in the microwave, or they're drinking out of plastic water bottles which have been lying in the sun, or they're using different storage containers. All of these are releasing toxins. And unfortunately, we are a society that is actually enveloped in all of these toxins. So we need to be really conscious about how much we are subjecting ourselves to these. So there's obviously a lot I can say, and it's there's a lot of different elements of the hormonal phases as we go from childhood to fertility to menopause. But the very key points are that, you know, think about what you are eating, think about what's actually on your plate in terms of how much high sugar levels there are, how much nutrient density there are. Think about how well you are digesting and absorbing the nutrients from these foods. Think about the toxicity in your environment, the digestive capacity you have, how well you're eliminating those toxins. And then we can even look at things like sleep, which we talked about last time. When we don't sleep properly, we actually have we can create an immediate imbalance within our hormones. Lack of sleep actually increases stress hormones. So when we talk about stress, stress isn't only emotional. Stress isn't because something happened and I'm worried and concerned about it. Stress is also if you have some kind of a pathogen in your body, if you have some virus in your body, if you have inflammation in your body, if you're not sleeping enough, if you're not giving yourself enough nutrients, so maybe you are not eating enough on a daily basis, you're missing meals regularly, this actually has a stress impact on the body. And so the body starts to preserve itself for the potential danger that it thinks is around the corner, because it doesn't understand modern day stresses in terms of emails or in terms of lack of sleep, or it just sees it as stress. And when it sees it as stress, the body goes into some sort of preservation mode. And what it starts to do is it starts to bind a lot of the hormones that are circulating in our body. So we might be producing hormones really well, but if we're under stress, the body immediately starts to lock down some of these hormones, so they're not available for use. And that's why it's really important to go back to managing stress. And it's not something you can fix with a pill. It's something you have to work really deeply on, whether it's through journaling. And I saw another wonderful devotee, she did a session on journaling, which can really help to manage your thoughts and write them down, whether it's making sure that you're at bed at the right time and not shortening your sleep, whether it's just being able to talk to other people, to just offload some of the thoughts that you're having, but managing stress. And I would say this is something that as women we have to do at the different points and cycles in our life. So like I mentioned, if it's your menstrual cycle, then during the time that you're on your flow, you really want to minimize that extra stress that you're having. You want to try and take that time to rest and recuperate. The time that follows the bleeding phase is what we call the mukaffa phase. This is up to ovulation. And in this phase, women generally report feeling their most healthiest and they report feeling the best. And then once we ovulate, which is mid-cycle, after that, a lot of women complain of the symptoms that they often get related to menstrual cycles. And again, the second half of the cycle is often problematic due to the imbalance within those hormones, as the progesterone, the estrogen, all those different hormones are being imbalanced. So if we listen to our body in that 5 days during the flow, if we then do more of our physical activities in that second phase, we will slowly start to find that that third phase in itself becomes more balanced, and we don't need to take medications and all of those other things to balance ourselves. So I know there's a lot I could say, but I think it might be a good idea for Toshni to come in now and to maybe ask some questions so we can structure a little bit more about the different areas that some of you might want covered.
Yeah, oh my gosh, that was amazing. Thank you so much for the input. I really, really liked what you said about the period being a blessing, because I mean, a lot of women would not agree with you. And I mean, just working in the emergency, I see a lot of complications of you know, women with bad cycles, heavy cycles, or just, you know, not feeling great when they're menstruating. So my question also, because what really hit me, I think, was that when you have the period, during the period time when you're menstruating, as Vaishnavis, we don't really engage in much service. Like we can't touch the deities, or we can't go on the altar. And what I really liked is that it's not that we're impure, it's rather that we you know, need the time to rest and recuperate and detoxify. So I really appreciate that sort of dimension into looking at things. But I also want to toss a question to you about how do women change this perspective of looking at their periods more positively? How does it start? What is the process? Because many women, when they're menstruating, either have complications like heavy bleeding, or they have a premenstrual syndrome where they're very angry, or they have like a swing of emotions just before their period. Maybe you have some advice on how to regulate their hormones in such a way that maybe if they're married or they have their family, their partner, their family can understand when they're going through these swings. Is there a way of controlling it in a quick way? I know you want a more chronic perspective to it, that people take control of their lives by controlling their diet and looking at other aspects of how to balance their hormones. But is there sort of not a quick fix, but maybe yoga practice or something that you could recommend for women to do before their premenstrual time?
Yeah, so I totally empathize with the fact there are a lot of women that struggle with monthly cycles. And I just want to add in on a personal note that I was at the point when I was a teenager, I was actually taking not even Nurofen because it didn't work. I was taking cocodamol like on all my cycles, because I was just assuming, okay, it's going to be painful. Let's just take something before it even starts. And I remember meeting my yoga teacher when I was 19, and she said to me, or 18, and she said to me that, you know, your periods don't have to be painful. And I literally looked at her and thought, she's crazy. That's not true. You must be some strange woman. And she was like, no, they don't have to be painful. And I can honestly say, I don't think I've touched medication for probably the last 15 years during cycles, even more. And I know that it is possible to get to that point that you can be pain-free from your monthly cycles. And some of the really key things I see clinically, whether we're going to back this up Ayurvedically, but the fact is it helps, is number one, gluten. Now, there is no point in having a deep discussion about the fact that Vedic culture talks about eating wheat and it's actually fine. Unfortunately, gluten is a huge problem in diets. And I have seen women go from the most excruciating periods to being symptom-free just by taking out gluten from their diet. And why that happens, we don't know. It could be because gluten and wheat is nowadays sprayed with so many pesticides and chemicals. It could be the crossbreeding of the way that wheat has been grown, and therefore people can't digest. It could be the general load that we have on our body from an immune point of view because of the toxic chemicals. But I have to say, clinically, it really works. You know, you remove the gluten from your diet. And what's gluten? Gluten really means wheat, rye, barley are the common ones. You're very particular, so you don't have even things in sauces. And for example, hing, which is a common spice in our kitchen, it's often combined with wheat flour in some of the brands. So you need to be very particular, read everything and make sure there's no traces of wheat going into your diet. And I would say try that in the month coming up to your cycle and see if that makes a difference in terms of the inflammation load. That would be the first thing, gluten. The second thing is going to be dairy. And the reason I say dairy is, again, because the way that dairy is produced, whenever you're dealing with hormonal imbalances, you really have to look at your dairy intake. And that is because a lot of the dairy that is produced has been imbalanced with the chemicals and hormones that the animals are injected with, and that carries through into the milk. And so people who suffer with discomfort, which might be through, they might notice they get spots at certain times of the month, or it could be, like you said, the pain and the aches. Removal of dairy can also really help. So wise, it's gluten and dairy. And the way that you work out whether it's affecting you is you have to do a complete removal. You can do sensitivity tests, but you know what, there's no point, no need to waste your money on things like that. You take the food out of your diet, keep it out for 3 to 4 weeks, and then you reintroduce it one at a time. So you don't have a where you have the dairy and the gluten together. You take one item of gluten or one item of dairy and you listen to your body, and you will know if it's an inflammatory food for you. So that would be the first thing I would say, is the gluten and dairy, is really look and see whether you're having a reaction to gluten and dairy. The second thing is essential fats. Now, as vegetarians, and some of us are vegans, we can end up with an imbalance in these healthy fats in our body. And what can happen is we're frying in things like sunflower oil, vegetable oil, and we have different omega fats in our body. And we actually, again, we need a balance. We don't need too much of one and too little of the other. But the way that people are now eating, we started to have an excess of more of something known as the omega-6 fats. And omega-6 fats are really necessary for our body, but too much, and again, in a body that's already a bit inflamed, can cause further inflammation. So I would say look at increasing things that are omega-3. So that could be things like your nuts and seeds. But unfortunately, for a lot of people, that's going to be supplementing with things like algae oil. The reason I say algae oil is because it has the best combination of the different breakdown of the omega-3s, EPA, DHAs, etc. And that can be very supportive for inflammation. So women that are really struggling with pains and aches, it can really help. For those people that are struggling more with the mood-related issues, I find things like evening primrose oil and borage oil, things that have those healthy GLAs, can actually completely get rid of that fiery woman before her period. You know, when you don't want to go near her because she's gonna, that kind of rage that you get, it can really help to balance that. But again, it would be going back and trying to know what dosha is imbalanced. So if you're someone that gets fiery and angry, if you're someone that feels a lot of heat, you maybe start to get diarrhea or migraines or anything like that, you're looking more at pitta. So you can Google balancing, and you want to try and look at balancing your pitta. If you're someone that gets anxious, gets lots of pain, gets headaches, gets worried, then we're looking at vata. So you want to try and work on that vata balancing throughout the beginning of the month. And if you're someone that gets a lot of bloating, you know, breast tenderness, heaviness, even nausea, then we're looking at more kapha balancing. So you want to go looking at more kapha balancing diet. But I would say if you try to follow the basic rules of, you know, watching what's on your plate, getting good amounts of exercise, getting good amounts of sleep, looking into the gluten and dairy, making sure your omega-3 fatty acids and those healthy omega-6 are in balance. These things often provide really instant relief. In terms of the kitchen, I would say one spice you might want to add in is saffron. I grew up in a family where we sold saffron, and I just think it's the most amazing spice. And it has scientifically been shown to reduce menstrual discomfort. So the way that I would recommend you can have it is if you have some coconut milk, and in coconut milk you have a few strands of saffron, you can add some cardamom, you can even have a little bit of turmeric powder, and you can have this on a nightly basis every day before you go to bed, and it's very nurturing, it's very comforting, but it also helps with balancing the menstrual cycle. And the other kitchen spice I think is really useful in menstrual cycles is cumin. Cumin has the action of cleaning the uterus, the womb, and it's actually used post-delivery. We use something known as jirak arishtam, which helps to cleanse the uterus. And so if you're somebody that feels that you get a lot of clots and you get a lot of cramping, then having regular infused water with cumin, and you can also add things like coriander, fennel, ajwain, and all these other things, but cumin and also a bit of hing can really help to soothe that pain during the sort of second window when you're feeling that discomfort. So these are some of the simple things that I think are safe to recommend on a virtual platform that you can try.
Yeah, wow, thank you. I really liked all those tips. I mean, I've also recommended primrose in the evening, especially for women going through menopause. I don't know if you could give any tips about menopause specifically, like when women are going through it, it affects their sleep, it affects all sorts of things. Is there something that you could recommend? One of the questions was that they also get a very dry mouth, metallic taste in their mouth. So it's very early stage for them, so they're not used to it. If you could recommend what to do.
Yeah, so menopause is very complex. And the reason it's complex is because what I find with menopause, it's not about, it's very personalized and individual, as is everything else. But in menopause specifically, the symptoms you're going to feel, you'll get women that say, I didn't experience anything as I went through menopause, and women that found it very difficult. And I tend to feel that the pitta dominant woman actually struggles more with menopause. Kapha is the dosha that is known to be the most ideal physical dosha. And the reason we say ideal physical dosha is because it has the least amount of discomfort along the way. So as we enter menopause, we're entering into the vata time. And so women that are already vata by nature, or women that are even more vata pitta by nature, they tend to really struggle with that menopausal phase, as opposed to women that are more kapha dominant, who tend to transition more smoothly. So when we are reaching menopause, the big misunderstanding in menopause is that it's all about estrogen and the fact that my estrogen levels have dropped and therefore I need to now add estrogen to my body. Actually, what can happen is that you just have an imbalance in your progesterone and estrogen levels. And so what you need to do is, with menopause, we can't sort of just say blankly do this, because we need to know what's going on in your particular body. And the way you can do that is by getting certain tests done. These tests, I would recommend not to get blood tests, but to get urine tests, because we look at what's metabolized out of the body as opposed to what's within the bloodstream, which is not going to be accurate. But self-care, I would say, is essential when it comes to menopause time. You really have to slow down and really think about the things that you're doing on a daily basis, and saying it's okay to take that time. when it comes to menopause. We do also have certain herbs that are used during menopause, but one of the key things you can add in your diet is flaxseed. The reason flaxseed can work really well is because it's known as a phytoestrogen. And what a phytoestrogen is, it has similar effects to estrogen in the body, but it has a lesser effect. Now, if you're somebody that's struggling with high levels of estrogen, which can happen, say you might be struggling with diabetes, or you've had fibroids and endometriosis in your life, or there's been high levels of estrogen, then what the flaxseed does, it sits in the receptor and it doesn't have a strong an effect. So it brings down that high level of estrogen. But on the other hand, if you're someone struggling with low levels of estrogen, it helps to bring up the level. So 2 tablespoons of flaxseed ground every single day can be really, really useful. You also want to make sure that you are going to the toilet every day and that your bowel movements are functioning well. The other very commonly used herb, which can really help, is actually maca. And what we find with maca is it helps more towards as you're transitioning menopause and a bit after. And what maca can do, it can really help with the energy levels and the mood swings that women have, and it can really
is that maca, like MACA?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that can really help with the energy levels, and you can literally have it on a daily basis, but you need to start slowly. The very important thing to remember with hormones is when you put something new into your diet or in your lifestyle, go slowly, very slow, because if you have not had enough of those hormones in your bloodstream, what happens is the receptors become very sensitive, because again, designed. So as we have these very sensitive receptors, if we have an influx of a huge amount of hormone, we tend to get out of whack. So let's take the example of women that might take progesterone creams. So you're told by your doctor that you're menopausing, you need to improve your progesterone levels, and so you're given a cream. Now, you might be one of those women that actually doesn't have that problem within the body. You actually have high levels of estrogen already. So when we add this cream in, whilst it will help, something people don't know is that progesterone actually increases the receptor activity of estrogen. So if you're already having lots of high estrogen symptoms and we put progesterone onto our skin, we now further exacerbate those symptoms. And so that's not going to be healthy. You need to go back and manage the hormones before you start to add in anything hormonal. So when it comes to menopause, I think firstly, women, if you're gaining a bit of weight prior to menopause, don't try and get rid of it. There's a reason why you are holding on to that extra weight. As our ovaries stop producing estrogen, the fat tissue can produce estrogen for us. And that can really help you smoothly transition through menopause. So you get this a lot, women, I'm going to the gym, I've stopped eating, I'm doing everything I can, but that weight won't come off. It's not going to come off. It doesn't want to come off. And everything you're doing is making the body hold on to it even more because you're increasing stress. So really be receptive to your body. If it is gaining a bit of weight around the stomach, around the hips, there's a reason. It's to help you comfortably transition through menopause.
Cool, thank you for that. I hope that answers the question for the questioner. I also see a lot of polycystic ovarian syndrome patients, and I'm sure you also deal with this because you're working in fertility a lot. Maybe you could give some advice on how to manage this, because a lot of times we put these patients on contraception, and I would also like to know your view on the contraceptive pill. And also we give them metformin to help control their insulin levels, but maybe you have a better approach to it. I know everyone is individualized, but
yeah, no, great question. And most definitely PCOS is a massive it's happening everywhere. A lot of women are suffering with it, and it actually goes back to the example I was giving earlier about high sugar and about managing blood sugar levels. So what happens in PCOS is that as we start to, a lot of women develop this kind of insulin resistance, and they start to produce more of these male hormones, which we consider male hormones like testosterone. But actually we need to undo the physiology between why that's happening. So whereas a doctor, you'll step in and you'll start to help them with immediately bringing down the symptoms, we actually go further back. So again, improving your insulin receptivity on your cells. So one thing I find that works very well with PCOS can be fasting. And the reason fasting can work well, there's an understanding, a lot of people do intermittent fasting now. So PCOS can be a bit of a kapha related problem. Now, when kapha is a problem in Ayurveda, we do opposite action. So whereas in things like homeopathy, it's like for like, in Ayurveda, we do opposite. So if there's excessive oiliness or heaviness within the body, we then add in dryness and lightness. So what happens when we do fasting is we give the body an opportunity, the digestive system an opportunity to rest, and we allow the cells to start functioning better. And there's a lot of research on this. So one of the very simple things you can do if you're struggling with PCOS is have a look at things like intermittent fasting to try and help manage those insulin levels, to try and manage the blood sugar levels, and to try and get the root cause managed better. The second thing that you can do with PCOS, you have to be very conscious about those toxins that are coming in externally, because again, the high levels of estrogen mimicking hormones can actually really affect PCOS. You want to try and follow a more of a kapha hara, which is reduction of kapha diet. So not having so many oily foods in your diet, not having a lot of heavy foods. So even if we're looking at glycemic index, it's really like saying the high carbohydrate foods, so very heavy carbs in terms of grains and even in vegetables. We want to reduce that. So we want to go more to a plant-based diet, having a lot more vegetables, having more of the starchy vegetables as opposed to having grains. So you're really allowing the blood sugar levels to be very well managed within the body. So there's some of the very simple things that someone, without having looked further into what's going on in their body, can start to work on.
Mm-hmm. I'm just going back to the first question we spoke about, the period and how to reduce dairy. A lot of questions have been asked about, milk is essential for the brain. Is there a substitute, or how do you stop milk gradually, or because a lot of people want to eat dairy a lot? So yeah, what's your opinion about this?
Yeah, so I totally agree about the brain nourishing benefits of milk, and actually more essentially ghee. And actually took me a long time to really get to why we have to start removing these food groups. And I would say that I don't necessarily promote like a vegan diet being the optimal way of living, but sometimes due to our physical nature at that time, those foods are difficult for us to digest optimally. So it's not a matter of removing them forever. It's a matter of allowing your body to reset so you can start to reintroduce these foods in a better way. So now when it comes to how to do it, if you really want to know whether the food is having a reaction, and I think that's often the best way of really wanting to remove it, is when you see what it does to you. Like somebody tells you to get rid of dairy, you're less likely to do it. But if you know how bad you felt after having it, you're probably less likely to do it. So which is why the best way to do it is to go for like a 3-week complete cleanse from it, knowing that after 3 weeks you're going to have it again. And then after 3 weeks you can start to reintroduce it. The other thing I would say is when you're doing something like an elimination or taking foods out of your diet, don't worry so much about the other foods that you are going to replace it with. So veganism has grown tremendously. There's so many options out there as alternatives. Coconut milk is a really nice one for people who are coming off dairy milk. What I would say is, again, read the cartons, because some of the non-dairy milks are full of a lot of chemicals, so try to go for the most natural options. And you'll find that very slowly you either start to develop a taste for these alternatives and you don't miss the dairy anymore, or when you reintroduce it back, you realize it wasn't such a big factor for you, in which case you can have it in moderation. But again, with dairy, for example, milk, we don't really promote just having milk on its own. Milk is usually had with spices. And the reason it's had with spices is to help in the digestion and the absorption of the milk. Now, when it comes to ghee, unfortunately, a lot of the ghee that's available is not actually real ghee. Ayurvedic ghee is made from the butter that you get from yogurt. So there's a lot of products out there that say this is pure ghee, Ayurvedic way. But if it's not made from yogurt, it's not the pure ghee. And the other thing with ghee is, because we remove the fats, it can actually still be added into people's diets who are still avoiding a lot of the dairy, and they can actually be okay with it. So I would say you first start to remove the food groups, see how you feel when you remove them and reintroduce them. Look at some of the dairy alternatives that are available. When you reintroduce them, if you react to milk, maybe try adding spices to help with the digestion of the milk. And if milk is too heavy, then maybe just keep the ghee in the diet, because the ghee also has the most amazing benefits for mental health. And it might be okay. I've seen lots of people that I use ghee with, but they can't handle milk. So the ghee, or they use the ghee, and that way you won't feel like you're missing out. And then the other element is, unfortunately, if you are going to follow the vegan diet long term, then supplementation with omega-3, and the omega-3 is what's helping those brain tissues, is going to be needed. You can't really go on a long-term vegan diet without supplementing.
Okay. Okay, cool. That really is a well-rounded answer, sorry. I see a lot of questions related to the thyroid, and since you've got the whole element of body, mind, and spirit, I would like to also pose a question. Why do you see so many women have this disorder, thyroid imbalances from high, low, and how would you recommend going about controlling it? Because it's a big hormone, I think. So it's a difficult question, but maybe you could give some, an overview of.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on thyroid, because I've been doing a lot of research into thyroid actually recently. Thyroid, as you mentioned, is very complicated. The first thing I would say is there are probably a lot of women out there that have either been diagnosed with thyroid dysfunction or have not been diagnosed with thyroid dysfunction that are actually suffering with thyroid dysfunction. And the reason for that is, I'm going to bring something new into the picture here. It's to do with the way that doctors will look at your levels. So depending on which country you are in, what happens is your levels are based upon, if we took everyone in the country who had a thyroid test and we mapped what came up, the bottom 5% and the top 5% are out of range. And anyone in that middle bell curve is fine. Now, if I said that to you, you would say, but what if I'm living in a society where there's a lot of thyroid dysfunction? That would pose the question that I might fall in the okay category, which is why a lot of women say, but my thyroid came back normal and I don't feel normal. So that's the first thing. Your thyroid test may not reveal that you actually have a thyroid dysfunction, because the range they use is huge and the range I use is a lot smaller. The second thing is that when we get the thyroid test done, doctors tend to look at TSH, and I'm not sure if it's the same for you in South Africa. You look at TSH and you look at T4. Now, TSH and T4 just tell me what's happening up here and what's happening here, but it doesn't actually tell me about the hormone that's going around in my body. Now, we actually need T3, which is the active form of the thyroid hormone, to actually feel the effects of the thyroid gland. And T3 is formed at other parts of our body. And the majority of women that get a thyroid test done do not get T3 done. They're TSH and T4. So what can happen is you are somebody that's producing plenty of T4, but your body is not converting the T4 to T3. Now, this is going to be common amongst us vegetarians, and the reason can be because there are certain nutrients we need to convert the T4 to T3. Namely, we need selenium, we need iron, we need zinc. Now, on a vegetarian diet and a plant-based diet, what happens is we end up having a very copper-dominant diet, and we end up not having as much zinc in our body. And also what can happen is we don't have enough iron in our body. So what can happen with some women is they're feeling very low in thyroid function simply because they are not converting that T4 into the T3 optimally. So you want to be very sure, is your iron levels up to scratch? And not just your hemoglobin levels, but your ferritin levels. Do you have good storage of iron? Have you got good amounts of zinc in your diet in relationship to the copper? Have you got good amounts of selenium in your diet? So this will ensure that the conversion is happening properly. Now, some women are on thyroid hormone supplementation, but again, the supplementation they're getting is actually only T4. It's not even T3. And so we need to have a very full panel of the thyroid to see where is the dysfunction. And to complicate things further, if you have stress, body, it locks down thyroid hormone. It turns the thyroid into an unusable form. So just by having stress, we have a massive impact on our metabolism and on our thyroid overall. So why are we having this? It could be the nutrient deficiency that we have. It could be the high levels of stress that we have. And ultimately, thyroid can be looked at as our Agni in the body, because thyroid is metabolism. And when we have low amounts of thyroid function, it's like the gas pedal, nothing is working properly. You might feel constipated, you feel lethargic, it's just not moving well. And so the thyroid gland is absolutely essential. And so some of those reasons are actually coming back down to diet, absorption within the diet, making sure that we are managing our stress levels. And the fourth thing, which I'm finding a lot of, is a lot of thyroid dysfunction is actually autoimmune. And where the body, that now starts a whole new chapter in this autoimmunity, and a lot of health problems from psoriasis, eczema, alopecia, you name it, thyroiditis. These are all autoimmune conditions. And now we're looking at the immune system. And that goes back to what I was talking about, toxicity, and the fact that our immune system is constantly being strained, that it gets to a point, it starts to attack our own natural body organs and tissues, and that can be the thyroid gland. So you need to make sure, firstly, assess which part of the thyroid is actually imbalanced, and then go back and see why. Is it stress? Is it the lack of nutrients for the transformation to take place? Is it because you have a high toxic load? Because the liver, if it's overworked because you're taking all these contraceptive pills, or you're taking anti-inflammatories, and you're taking all these medications, they all get processed through our liver. If our liver is overwhelmed, then that can impact the production of these thyroid hormones. So that's why it's really hard to separate things, because in the end it all comes back to the larger picture.
I mean, I see some recurrent questions here. Maybe there's some repetition. I just wanted to emphasize what Ananga Sakhi Dd is trying to say is that our diet is essential, and if you're having these abnormal periods, it would start with what she's been talking about, all these supplements to add to your diet, and going about doing it from a long term. There's not going to be a short-term answer for each individual question. I mean, a lot of them is talking about like periods that have lasted longer than 5 days, can last up to 3 weeks. They're struggling in terms of exhaustion, and their sadhana is being affected. Other questions are like, they're just constantly down all the time because their periods are so heavy and painful. I mean, we can go on and on about all of these questions, because so many combinations of hormones are imbalanced, and then also the womb is out of, they've got their own problems, and they're like fibroids or whatever else is going on there. So would you be able
I just
to
want to say to that I think it's the same, going back to the psychology of accountability, that we have to take responsibility for the whatever our body is showing, and unfortunately there is not normally a magic solution, and if there is a band-aid, it's going to normally have another side effect causing something else. So Toshni mentioned about contraceptive pills are often given to women to balance out the hormones. Now, contraceptive pills can do a number of things to our body, and she was going to ask, so I'll elaborate on that here. One of them is it can use up key vitamins in our body, such as B6. B6 is a vitamin which is really important for detoxification pathways, and what birth control pills can do is they can deplete us in this B6. So if we are depleted in this B6, we are not going to metabolize and detoxify and release these hormones from our body optimally. B6 also has so many important actions when it comes to our brains, neurotransmitters, our gut health, so many different things. So we want to make sure that what medications we're taking, are they depleting us elsewhere? The other thing that birth control pills can do is they can cause intestinal permeability. So they can create the gut lining to become not as efficient in the job of preventing toxins from flowing into the bloodstream, and it causes the lining to become separated. And so one thing I would say is anything you put in your body, please research and understand what it's doing and why you're taking it. And this goes even for herbal remedies. I have people that will say to me, oh, I do Ayurveda, I take Shatavari. And the first thing I say to them, but why are you taking it? What's your reason? Or they say, oh, I'm on vitamin D. And I'm like, okay, but have you checked your vitamin D levels? Because if your vitamin D levels are too high, then vitamin D is actually going to have the opposing effect that you want it to. So please don't follow something because you read it on a blog or because you heard it. Really know in your particular body, how is it going to benefit you? And if you're going to take some medication because you have to, that's also fine. But be aware of some of the effects it could have so that you can counteract those. So if you're having long periods, you definitely need to make sure that you've been checked by your doctor to make sure that everything is okay. And then you need to look at, that could be due to you not ovulating properly. It could be because you have excessive estrogen levels throughout the month and therefore your flow is carrying on. So you want to look at Vata dosha, you want to look at the kapha balance within the body to make sure that isn't there. You're going to feel tired because you're releasing so much iron and that's going to make you lethargic. So you want to make sure iron levels are being depleted whilst you're dealing with the root cause of the problem. So yes, as you can see, hormones are very interlinked, but please always go to your doctor as your first point of call, you know, especially for just getting that proper analysis to make sure that everything is in check. Don't go down that route that I'm only going to follow alternative medicine and I'm not going to visit my doctor as well, because there's a very healthy balance between how we work together.
Yeah, just to go back to your suggestion for fasting, some of the women want to know if they can do this during their pregnancy or while they're feeding their baby.
Yes, so when you're pregnant and you are breastfeeding, the rules change completely. And you have to be very conscious actually not to do these things, such as fasting. What we understand as both menstrual blood flow and breast milk is known as the upadhatu of rasadhatu. So rasadhatu is the essence of the food that we eat. So when we eat, the food has its nutrient portion and it has its mala portion, the waste portion. That nutrient portion goes on to form blood flow in the menstrual cycle, and it goes on to cause breast milk, which is why you shouldn't really be getting pregnant while you're breastfeeding, or your menstrual flow will stop.
Is available.
And
sorry,
so
I lost you for a moment there.
So it's really important that when you're pregnant and when you're breastfeeding, you have to start to follow a very different diet, and that will be very specific for those times. So I wouldn't recommend fasting during breastfeeding and during pregnancy, but actually fasting has a very important place prior to conception, and when you have these kapha related issues outside during the menstrual cycle.
I was just, sorry, I lost you for a moment there. I was just encouraging devotees, if they want to ever consult you, that Saradia has just put your email address here, but you also have a website and an Instagram page.
Yeah, I just put my page here. I do think that this kind of dialogue is going to be nicer to be done on specific forums. So I am thinking about ways of doing this for the devotee community, like maybe having a group which is about infertility or conception, where all the devotees can come together and they're all going to have very similar questions, and we can actually work in a program where you can look at what you need to do. Obviously, we can't personalize individual advice in that forum, but it will be a lot more clearer, because obviously today we're talking about too many different hormones
yes.
at once, and I'm sure it can be overwhelming even for those people listening, because it can be overwhelming for me to try and get the message across in a clear format. But when we break it down, hopefully we can start to help everybody, whether it's for the menstrual cycles, whether it's for menopause. So separating them into separate categories might be a way of doing it.
Yeah, I think Vaishnavis will find it very helpful, because I mean we all fall along the category from very young to middle-aged, and then perimenopausal and to menopause. So it is difficult to get through everyone's questions. What we will do is we'll gather them and we'll give them to Ananga Sakhi Mataji, and what we can do is make it available either on the Facebook page. I know some people don't have Facebook, but what we could do is give you a link. Maybe we can put it on your blog, on your website, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, and we'll just share her web address here and her Instagram page, so that I mean, there's a lot of appreciation as well. People are
It wasn't too like here,
loving the
everywhere.
topic.
I have to say, in my head, I had something very different planned, and what came out was very different. I'm so used to doing these as like webinars and structure.
Yeah.
As you can see, I like to give more information, and it can be a little bit.
Yeah, it's
I'm so sorry.
no. I mean, I'm glad we covered what the Vaishnavis have asked. I mean, at least I think we've covered 30%. There's
I'm
a
happy
lot of
to take
questions.
a few more specific questions.
Okay, there's a question about the cumin that you recommended. How does it help detox? And then there's another question also about these herbs: carom seeds, ajwain, and coriander seeds. Is this helpful for thyroid and metabolism? Yeah, but just about these spices.
Yeah, so I would say one of the best things we can do is start to learn what's in our kitchen. So we don't even have to go to the pharmaceutical companies and the supplement companies, especially if you've grown up on a more Western diet and haven't grown up with huge amount of spices. I can just see great effects by using what's in my kitchen. And also with my children, I can see they have a tummy upset or something and we go straight to spices. While I'm talking about kids, just really off the point, but if you are a parent, one thing I would really suggest is teach your children to understand the symptoms in relation to something they've done. So if they have a tummy ache, then you go back and you say to them, okay, was it something you ate? Did you drink enough water? What were your bowel movements like? So they, from a really young age, understand that if I feel something, it's because of something else that happened, not because now I need to go and see a doctor. So in relationship to spices, some of the spices have inherent qualities which are known as prabhav in Ayurveda. And so cumin has one of those, which is that it naturally has efficacy for the uterus. And it works very well at cleansing the uterus. Now, most spices are fire. They have Agni Tattva in them. So they are fiery and they help with metabolism. So anyone who's struggling with underactive thyroid, using spices will definitely be very useful because it helps to reignite the metabolism in the body. The other thing is checking your tongue, because if you have a white coating on your tongue, it's suggestive that you are not digesting well and that you're probably producing a lot of those unwanted digestive matter. And so by introduction of spices such as ginger powder, you can really start to digest those toxins within your body. Ginger, black pepper are really good at digestive spices. So ajwain has very good effects even after you've had a baby. One of the things we do with ajwain is we roast it on a pan and the woman inhales the fumes of ajwain because it really helps to get rid of the vata dosha, that if you think about pregnancy, you've had a baby, so it's taken up this space, and all of a sudden the baby comes out, you have this vacant space in your body. And that's why women experience a lot of dryness after pregnancy. Their hair falls out, they get a lot of joint aches. So postnatally, we have a very strict program that we follow to make sure that we balance those doshas back very quickly. And ajwain is one of those really good spices that can really help with that vata balancing. So when we're having cramping and issues with the flow of our menstrual cycle, we can help balance that vata, give it the nice downward flow by making sure that we have these spices. The other thing you don't want to do during the menstrual cycle, if you do yoga, is to do any inversions or go upside down, because that then goes against the natural flow of the apana vayu, which is downward. So you want to make sure you've got good downward flow. So those spices definitely very useful and very good at digestion. The only thing I would add is if you're struggling with pitta related problems, then you do want to be a bit wary of spices. And the key spices I would use if you have pitta related dysfunction is coriander, it's fennel, and it's cardamom. So in terms of spices, these are really good go-to spices to bring down pitta related problems. So that's heat related, anger temperament related, diarrhea, very fast metabolic function. So again, looking at what dosha's imbalanced, but just having a bit more understanding of what's in that spice tin. So you can just go to those particular herbs at that time.
So also another question about a kapha type of person is that when they're fasting, they get very bloated, or detoxing, they get very bloated. So is there a better way to detox, or is there something they should avoid, or just stick it through?
Okay, stick it through. Okay, so this is where personalized support can be really useful. But I would say if you're experiencing bloating and unwanted symptoms like that, that's more of a vata type of imbalance. And so it shows that there's more doshas that are now involved in your dysfunction. Now, when we fast, we don't go for full dry fast. You actually want to encourage warm liquids. So you want to be having warm teas. So if you're struggling with bloating and those kind of feelings, then it could be that you just need to have plenty of nice hot liquids in your body, and that will help. So that will help in terms of your mental health as well as your physical health. Now, the other thing I just want to add is I did mention fasting, but there are a whole group of people that fasting is not good for. And so the group of people that fasting is not good for are people that have been under chronic stress, or people that have stress within the body, because fasting is another form of stress. And you don't want to add to that stress load. So if you think you are a kapha person and you're predominantly kapha imbalanced, then going down the intermittent fasting route is pretty safe. But if you're somebody that has other problems and you're not sure, you've had stressful periods, then I would say don't go headstrong into something like intermittent fasting, because it could make things worse for you. But if you're getting bloating and other symptoms, then we're looking at other doshic imbalances as well. The other thing you want to remember when you start to fast is sometimes we get detoxification from things like sugar, gluten. Now, what happens in our body is the body actually makes you want to eat these foods. Our gut is full of a huge amount of microbiome, gut bacteria, and this gut bacteria actually has its own influence on us. And they enjoy these certain foods that we eat. So they can actually make us want to eat them more and more. And so sometimes you have to go through a little bit of that cleansing process where you just sort of go, I'm not going to have it, and then reintroduce it back in. So that comes down to your personal judgment. Do you feel what you're going through is healthy and it's optimal? Or is there some other kind of dysfunction going on? But just in answer to the question, if you're having bloating and unwanted, I would say increase the hot liquids in your diet, the spices, and that should help with the digestive imbalance.
Okay, thank you. There's also, since you mentioned the microbiome, some people wanted to ask, what is where is it? Krishna. How can you observe the nutrients in your bowel so that your the bowel movement is better? And what is the microbiome, if you could just go into it, and how is it essential for our balancing of our hormones?
Yeah, so for microbiome hormones, it's really interesting. What I find really fascinating is 20 years ago when I studied Ayurveda, I couldn't have this conversation in a science term because people didn't accept anything that I was saying, that the gut was important or that it even affected hormones. But now we have so much science, it's like front page news, So the first science, the latest science is that we actually have something known, now this is a bit of a mouthful, it's known as the estrobolome, which is a microbiome that purely is to do with estrogen. So what can happen is if we have an imbalance in our gut bacteria, there's actually a bacteria that forms, which when I was trying to explain that when we get rid of estrogen from our body, it goes through detoxification process, and then it binds to a carrier, which is carried through our stool. If you have an imbalanced gut, you can actually have high levels of a bacteria, which breaks the transport of the metabolism out of the gut, and it brings it back into circulation and back into your body. So the gut microbiome is so key in making sure we have hormone balance. The other thing the gut microbiome does, it actually produces nutrients. It actually makes neurotransmitters. So when they say there's a gut-brain connect, we actually can feel really upset, depressed, anxious because of what's going on in our gut. And that's why a lot of the time the work starts in the gut, getting that balance in the gut. And as we get the balance in the gut, we notice our mood levels, our energy levels all change because everything starts to work synergistically well together. It's not about more of one or less of one. It's about a nice, healthy balance. And actually the best way to get diversity in your gut is to eat a broad range of vegetables. It's better than taking any probiotic. It's better than doing anything. It's the variety and diversity that you put in your body, which then produces those good, healthy balance of bacteria. Now, when we're having bowel movements, we want to make sure that we're going at least once a day. You want to go first thing in the morning. You want to make sure it's well formed. If you're noticing that the bowels are not well formed, it will give you signs as to where the problem may come. So if you're finding you've got very hard stool, it could be you're not having enough water. You need to increase your hydration levels. It could be that you're under stress. Stress will also cause your digestive system to close down. So are you relaxed? That's why sometimes, you know, maybe people go for a bit of a walk and then they have the urge to pass stool. If you have very light sort of sticky stool, it can mean that you are not digesting fats properly. So we look at things like bitter foods. A lot of bitter foods can help with your gallbladder and your liver. So you want to be having things like fenugreek, you want to have things like chlorella, you want to have things like beetroot, which help to make sure that the flow of the bile is good, which will help with the stool formation. So depending on what you're seeing in your stool can help you look at where you need to make those changes in your diet.
I know we're almost running out of time. People are still asking me for your information. I have I think your email is anju.sandilya.
No, actually, I would rather we don't. I would rather things came to an email that I can monitor. So that is, let me write it on here now.
Okay, and then I will share it on Facebook. And your Instagram page, I tried looking for it. I can't find it.
That's really helpful, isn't it? It's, obviously, I'm very well, easy to find. Yeah, it's again my name, if I can even spell it myself. Yeah.
Is it? It's not Ananga Sakhi. It is Ananga.
No, it's Anuja Shandilia.
Okay, Anuja. Okay, that makes sense. Oh, I found it immediately.
Yeah, and that I've just put on the chat tab my email address, and then my website is my name, and then there's a Facebook page. So whichever way you want to contact me, but the Facebook page, I really give more articles and things. Instagram is a bit of a mix, but I'm not very social media savvy and it's not something I spend a lot of time on. But I do have some handouts, by the way, on PCOS, which I wrote recently, one on fertility. So I'm trying to spend more time at making materials that I could easily email out to anybody who wants them. And like I said, I'm going to have a bit of a think about how to oh, I see, I've sent it, it's somehow come on private, everyone. Okay, so I'm going to have a think about the best way to be able to support others during their different phases in life. I do obviously do things one-to-one, but I can understand some people maybe want a more general understanding. So if anyone has any ideas, let me know. I'll be happy to facilitate what I can to help those different groups, so you have more one-to-one.
Okay, cool. So I've shared your email address so they can obviously contact you if they need private consultation. What I also want to add to you Vaishnavis out there is that Mataji does, with her husband, she does sessions about if you're wanting to start a family. So she has the whole science and the Ayurveda all behind it, and she can really assist the family starting in getting proper progeny, good progeny rather. And so if you also want to consult her about that, you can email her about that. But thank you so much for this session. I mean, it is a big topic and we've tried to cover as much as possible. I mean, we could speak forever and ever.
I don't know how it went. I just hope that it was palatable and that I gave at least something that somebody was able to understand. I was telling Toshni that there has been so much going on in the last few weeks that the a bit fogged at the moment, and even putting this together today, I didn't have the clarity of thought that maybe I would have liked to have. So I hope that everybody was able to get something from it. But I really want to be able to help as many as I can. So if any of you are more technical or you have any ideas about how, just email me and we'll talk about it.
Cool. I mean, the session went well. I have a lot of feedback here. Many devotees have shown their appreciation even on Facebook because, yeah, I mean, this is a topic we have to deal with on a daily basis. So thank you for making time for this. I'm sure we'll have more sessions in the future about this, and we'll send you the questions, and hopefully the devotees can find it. Maybe you can put it available on your blog or your website, and they can find it. Thank you so much, Vaishnavis, for joining us on Facebook and Zoom, for making the time to listen to this important topic. And we will see you in the future.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much.
I'm just going to end the live. Okay, the devotees on Zoom, if you want to unmute yourself and say thank you, you're welcome to.
Thank you so much, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Very useful, Mataji. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for saying thank you.
This is the best part of the Zoom. Everybody can say a personal thank you. I'm going to...
Thank you so much, Mataji. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much.